Hi everyone, and thank you for coming to tonight's lecture, Along the Rivers, by Lorenzo, Luzzi, Anthony, and Johnny. This talk is part of our What's Next lecture series, which invites recent graduates back to the AA to talk about their unique forms of practice. And our speakers tonight are very recent graduates. They graduated in June last year. And the title of the talk tonight comes from the project they initiated in the summer between their 4th and 5th years, after Anthony won a KPF traveling fellowship. And as he explained to me recently, they were each applying for different sources of funding that would enable them to do this project, which I thought was quite interesting in terms of like how you do a joint research project rather than a single author. You start to do things as a group. And this enabled them to carry out this project into contemporary Chinese architecture and the forces that are shaping it. So they spent the summer, not this past summer, but the one before that, traveling along the Yellow and the Yangtze Rivers to understand them as resources for both building and culture. The rivers are often referred to as the cradle of Chinese culture and have since occupied a central role in the expansion of that culture as it is understood in a context of urban optimization and rising domestic mobility. So their research took the form of emails, interviews, photography, film, bargaining, cars, trains, and canal locks, as they examined the dual context of the rivers whilst exploring new ways of talking about architecture in China. And I think the project's interesting because it was initiated while they were all still studying at the AA, and they spent their 5th year kind of balancing between working in their individual units. I think all of you were in different units. And then also kind of meeting together as a group to debate kind of what forms this research could take in terms of how it could be communicated and become part of a bigger conversation. And during London Design Festival last year, they exhibited it in a kind of mini exhibition in 32 Bedford Square, where they started to show photographs and films. And that was just a snapshot of the kind of things that they're brainstorming for the year ahead in terms of how they would communicate that going forward and kind of where the project goes from here. And I just think it's a great example of a multi-authored research project that was kind of born out of the AA, yet not from a specific unit or program within the school. It kind of takes on a life of its own through the group. So to briefly introduce our 4 speakers, I'm just going to introduce them in terms of which units they did. So Anthony studied for 2 years in Diploma 5. Zudi is the exception in that he spent 1 year in 2 different units, so in Diploma 6 and then 7. Lorenzo was in Diploma 8 for 2 years, and Johnny was in Diploma 17. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming the 4 of them back to the AA.
Thank you for the introduction, and thanks everybody for coming. We're super humbled to be part of this series, and even more so to be counted among all the really interesting people who've been presenting and contributing to this conversation about entering into and negotiating environments of architectural work. As Minijie mentioned, in our case, I think we're really placing ourselves as close as can be in this gap, having just graduated in June. That being said, we're not really presenting tonight a particular practice, but a single ongoing project that spans between our time as students and now as recent graduates. One that, in a way, focuses on how we are continually drawing on our experiences here to try and define a certain conversation and refine the output that we develop that we think holds some value in the realm of architecture. So as mentioned, Along the Rivers is a documentary and research project tracing different identities of the Yellow and Yangtze Rivers in China as significant landmarks and natural forces that have shaped regional lifestyles and cultural expressions, and as infrastructures tapped for their potential to support the realization of modern ideals from the party of Mao to the present. Our interest in this was to try and record kind of 2 parallel histories of the rivers, exploring pockets of vernacular life, existing and emerging monuments that have come to reflect new forms of mobility, and getting as close as we could to the very infrastructure that we understood to be rooted in the rivers, as well as present in the foundation of numerous other conversations about architecture in China, such as rapid construction and relocation. So the itinerary that we set out had a fairly direct motive, which was to follow these rivers from mouth to source, from the deep water ports of Shanghai on the bottom right to the river source in the Tibetan Plateau all the way on the left, and then back again to the Yellow River estuary in the top right. But one thing that we would come to find out is that this is a little easier said than done. In fact, having to alter our plans quite early on due to some seasonal flooding that happened to be some of the heaviest in recent decades. In terms of gear and packing, we kept it quite light. This made up about 90% of what we were carrying with us, and was one way that we were drawing on our collective experiences here to try and strategize the documentation and coordinate all of the gear beforehand with setting goals for filming equipment to bring, what photographic formats to use, and how to design a routine for archiving throughout the trip, which was one of two parts in our daily ritual, the other being a daily blog that was going to be kind of a live archive that we kind of are continuing to draw on as we progress forward in the project. But again, in certain cases, the realization was not always that the situation was where we could just show up and start shooting in a location, since some of these places were quite high profile. Requesting visits and communicating with officials was almost a project in itself. This is sort of one of many emails that we had to write and translate and send out to request certain visits. And so as mentioned before, the whole logistical phase of the project took place while we were still here as students, and now the transition, both practically and for the project, has been about how we want to set up this conversation and collate this material in post-production, which we're going to present here tonight in 3 chapters. The first being cultural and political landscape, the second, monumentality, and the third, ways of living, together forming the main body of, for us, what's next, at least so far. We're going to switch it up.
All right. Well, the development of China has always had a very close relationship with its rivers, providing rich and fertile soil for agrarian life on which early settlements were dependent, or routes for trade via infrastructural projects dating back 1,500 years, such as the Grand Canal. Due to its importance, the rivers and its surrounding natural landscapes have been a recurring theme in artwork throughout history, from paintings and sculptures to origin myths which have been passed on through generations.
讲故事说的是白河跟那个四大的港那个港这两条龙，一个土龙，一个白水龙，他俩比赛说看谁跑过谁来。白河出溜正南，那个土龙跑到中途，河北西岸有个中途，跑到那儿有3个人给车里脑袋这个方向出现了。 不得了，这土了要起事，赶紧搁到那山上弄个一个土，小土山上，总头那边一对一斜，土龙头斜，他跑不了了。
More recently, however, the rivers have also been used as a scene of political assembly, such as Mao Zedong's 1966 swim in the Yangtze River in Wuhan, compositing a kind of cultural revitalization with statecraft, and tying together a history of living with the rivers and his vision for large infrastructural investment to enable a new social structure. This widely documented event was disseminated across state media, and it can be read as a sort of catalyst of the Cultural Revolution, cemented in the memory of the rising middle class we see rapidly expanding today. And just to confirm, the person right before Mao is not actually me, it just looks like me, so. Yeah. Well, this particular moment is memorialized in this statue that we see here, with this anecdote that he continues to watch over and protect the city from future flooding. And he had even written a poem in the weeks following his spectacle entitled Swimming, which can be understood as him recognizing how traditional lifestyles were hindered by cyclical recovery from seasonal flooding, which was affecting the rural population year after year. And that in his idea of a modernized China, a mobilization of dam and aqueduct construction would lead to a more prosperous society. As we mentioned earlier, Wuhan was experiencing one of the heaviest floods in decades, a significant consequence of rapid overconstruction of the city. And historically, Wuhan has always been known for its many lakes. And these lakes were a natural advantage as they absorbed much of the seasonal flooding in the region. Even with the presence of the Three Gorges Dam just upstream, the building ambition still exposed vulnerabilities of the city to its natural landscape. We visited Wuhan several times during our trip to observe different stages and the aftermath of the flooding, as well as how rescue efforts and flood response teams operate today.
分配的看受灾严重吧。
受灾严重，像就上个月的那种吗？
上一次就是城区里面其实还好，主要是偏一点的地方，他们都转移了，全部都转移了。记得青山有一个新闻，他家的那个房子就直接就被水冲垮了，然后政府是补贴了几万块钱，然后原价就是那个建造的那个房子的价格就没有多少钱，10几万，一共10几万，250个平方的房子就还给他了。然后还有，不是他很多鱼塘都淹了，鱼都走了，也是免费发鱼苗嘛。公园一直都在修，现在桥头那边也是这几年也要往上修。
So we're referring to the Three Gorges Dam as a very big symbolic project, but part of our research and itinerary included some of the prototypes and earlier precursors that came before it, such as the Xiaolongdi Dam, shown here. And so when we were coming to visit this place, actually, we were on our way to the ticket office, and this lady over here with the umbrella just kind of popped out of the bushes and stopped our car and offered to let us through a back entrance for a very personalized tour for a quarter of the price, which sounds dodgy, but it's just kind of the way things happen. But she had a lot of facts to share, and though it was quite lengthy, it was still very illuminating to see how these projects signified a lot of international collaboration.
这个下方就是小浪底大坝。小浪底这个坝是土石坝，土石结构，没有钢筋混凝土，它是咱亚洲最大一座土石坝。外边是红石头，看到吧？它就是就地取材，利用当地这个红石头。坝中间是红粘土，红粘土跟那个红胶泥一样那种红粘土，在大坝的中间，它主要是起到防渗作用，不渗水，越是水粘度越大。这个坝长是1667米，就是3里多地。坝的高度中间这个垂直高度是154米高，它的底宽是864米底部，这个上面顶部只有15米宽，梯形的就是上塞下宽。它开挖那个108条洞里边，它分作类型的，分4大类。它主要有导流洞、有排沙洞、有防洪洞、有发电洞。发电机组都在山体的内部山洞里边安装着，外面任何地方都看不到，也不让进了，它属于地下工程。当时中国人还没有这个技术能力，它是利用市行贷款，国际上招标全是外国人在这建的。当时51个国家在这投标，但是中标商只有3个国家，它主要是由意大利、德国和法国3个国家在这承建的。就是说，小浪底这个工程呢，它一共分3个标段，一标它是意大利负责承建这个大坝，这个主体大坝就是意大利承建。2标是德国负责那个节水处，那个地方是储水处。下边有泄洪排沙，这个系统它是德国建的。3标是法国，负责那个地下厂房发电洞群。那这山里边那个发电机组、发电设施都是法国人建的。它一共分这3个标段完成小浪底这个工程。还有6大功能，主要是起到防洪、防淋、减雨、供水、灌溉、发电。这边没有过滤之前是一条河，它是一条黄河，一碗水半碗泥沙，它是黄颜色。变清了以后，周围这居民你看，黄河水它是母亲河，为了成为母亲河，就是周围这居民可以饮用，吃这黄河水嘛，它是淡水。再个其次就是灌溉，利用这清水发电，它是综合效益。这边是上游由西向东流，那边储水处在那个地方有2个渠道，你看搁这个地方营运户能看，它是。对面的山体的内部一共安装了6台发电机组，每台机组发电量是30万千瓦，每年的发电量是51亿度，总投资420个亿人民币。
As one of the first hydroelectric dams to be constructed in China, it can be read as a symbol of Deng Xiaoping's open reform policy. Foreign contractors and consultants were brought in from the West for the first time, who informed the basis of contemporary dam construction. There's also a highly politicized context in which access and claim over the source of the rivers is the subject of an ongoing border and territorial conflicts over Tibet, such as that with India this year. Due to the sources of the Yellow, Yangtze, and Mekong rivers, located within Sanjiangyuan National Park in Qinghai Province. This territory is precious to the country's political and economic ambitions, but also to the ethnically Tibetan nomadic people who still maintain their way of living in the region through activities such as goat herding. And today, thousands of ethnically Han Chinese are moving into cities in the regions such as Yushu. The city was severely damaged by an earthquake in 2010, and the government used this as an opportunity to reconstruct the city at a far larger scale than the original settlement. And by doing this, they're exerting a form of soft power in order to lay claim to the land that provides the water for the entire country's population. For the same reasons, efforts to expand the highway network leads to easier access for Chinese tourism and settlement, and thereby establishing a precedent for the so-called territorial control. And despite the shifts in the cultural and political landscape of the rivers in contemporary China, it remains an important vehicle for cultural production and public gathering. This is a still from Bertinsky's watermarks showing the annual silt release from Xiaolongdi Dam. It's referred to locals as the Wave Festival, and one thing we found really interesting was how it kind of captures the river as a site of public gathering, where the powers of the rivers and the presence of infrastructure constitutes new traditions. And I'm just going to pass it on to Lorenzo now.
Okay. We spent quite a bit of time studying and visiting these infrastructures, more as monuments, rather than significant civil engineering accomplishments. That has a lot to do with how people are organizing around them as new forms of settlements or annual events. To investigate the qualities of this monumentality that this monumentality has, we visited certain historical monuments such as the White Horse Temple in Luoyang, among many others. Constructed in the 1st century, it has been voluntarily destroyed and rebuilt several times over its long history, and today remains an important place for daily life, as well as a point of pilgrimage as China's first Buddhist temple. Seeing the temple in plan, the complex organizes itself via a common framework of halls and courtyards. This is a typical layout in which each space and its artifacts retain their own distinguished role. And this allows for a plurality of forms of activity where the sequence of spaces shifts the way of gathering as one progresses through. Typical activities as bringing offerings to the monks or burning bundles of incense within the courtyards in quiet moments of collective prayer. And this was a fascinating for us, but what we were primarily interested in was to focus on the usage of space, its division and its organization, and how the idea of tradition is not only expressed in the ritual, but also in the preservation and evolution of contemporary public spaces. The fact that the temple has been burnt down and reconstructed suggests that the participatory nature is a key quality of the space. There is a building, of course, and then there is also the secular gathering that is kept consistent over a long period of time, which we are observing and as the constitution of the monument itself. Looking into a slightly different context, we passed through the city of Datong to understand what's going on with the reconstruction process of the city. Through its, although it's not a particularly important city, the local government is employing a similar reconstruction strategy to the one of the White Horse Temple. The difference, however, is on how the city was becoming run down, and the government actually relocated the population to its periphery outside the city walls, while they could reconstruct from historical references a new version of the city center, identical to its original Ming dynasty state. Cities like Datong are undergoing this process in order to try and attract rising tourist figures. And what was interesting for us was to try and understand what motives of authenticity, its relationship to its local population. And regarding the reconstruction within the city walls, the driving force for this design, as you can see here in the pictures, is not the scale and form of the gatherings, but instead it is the trend for exclusively zoning commercial activity in the city center, targeted towards attracting higher touristic revenues and creating a separation between the domestic and the public life of the city. Cities such as Datong and many others have struggled with the centralization of economic power into major cities such as Beijing or Shanghai. And historical revivalism is a vehicle for them to lobby funds in order to compete and relying on tourism rather than local production. Right now we witness the reconstruction of long-lost monuments of antiquity, often clashing with what the cities have developed into. As public spaces, they often wind up with some strange contrasts. It is simply the overlay of the old orientation over the existing context, such as the construction of this enormous pagoda over an existing grid. We were ourselves on the road for most of the time, and often as the only foreigners, it happened that we were able to see this idea of largeness at play from the perspective of the domestic tourist. Because aside from the massive attractions of cities, the construction of large-scale monuments extends across the country into the landscape. Shown here, it's the absurd Spring Temple Buddha in Henan province, measuring 128 meters. It's within the landscape as a dominating presence amongst mountains. Completed in 2008, it is currently the tallest statue in the world. But it is, however, rather unceremoniously looking over a highway, where only curious passers stop by and then get back on the road as soon as they can. But this is not an isolated case. The monument of the two emperors of Zhengzhou sits atop an artificially constructed mountain to match the peaks of the rest of the landscape. And these large-scale monuments are often built for the predicted further growth in tourism and domestic travel, but at the moment are still part of a collection of sites to be visited in very far future generations. While these contemporary monuments have been constructed to dominate the scale of the landscape, monuments of antiquity such as the Hanging Temple are built to integrate into its surrounding environment. The integration into the landscape, and therefore the way it is delicately attaching itself to the cliffside, is to protect itself from the regular flooding of the valley. But today, the flooding in the valley is prevented by a newly constructed dam located literally 20-30 meters up the temple. And when we make the link to the Three Gorges Dam, it sits at the intersection of the different qualities of monumentality that we observed. As possibility, the highest profile hydroelectric dam, where visits to the region by tourists are rising every year. These visits are actually quite choreographed, following a procession of small showrooms and terraced viewings points connected by a singular pathway. Nevertheless, the vantage points still attract various tour groups. Part of the experience is to visit the enormous relics of the construction process itself. Visitors passing by during their curated tour of the Three Gorges Dam often can observe these core samples from the mountain that they've been just digging out, and now they keep as a they just keep it as a statue. This is just a cylinder. Currently, there are even plans to construct a large upscale hotel to encourage more tourism in the area, and highly advertised hotels are printed on billboards anywhere in the country, including those signs on the right side of the picture. The Three Gorges Dam can be seen as a convergence between infrastructural development and growth of domestic tourism, of which Zudi will speak about, along the way of living along the waters.
So we were also interested in our research was the shifting ways of living and the changing nature of production due to the mass infrastructural projects. So we spent a fair amount of time here talking to locals, such as taxi drivers and such. And in the interview coming up, we were trying to understand how such infrastructural projects shifted the mode of dependency on the river.
它是水位怕它涨水的时候或者冲的时候，防止怕一个人掉进去了。一般的可以涨最多的时候，我听他们说，最多的时候涨了水位抬高了有17、18米，下面不是上面，下面抬高了17、18米，它抬高的很高了。我们上面抬高个几十米都很正常，因为它有专门有蓄水的，它有蓄水位，下面都不一样。 再怎么发水，我们这个地方没有问题。
为什么？
闸，它这个蓄水或泄洪的闸在这里，我们有这个闸控制它的水位。我们这里没有问题，因为我们在上游，它那里是下游。
像那三斗坪
平那块呢，那不是也下游啊？
它也是下游，但是它也是上次它也没有淹到，它也没淹到。
到武汉才淹。
武汉那个地方淹，它主要是在地势平坦，雨下的太多，没有泄出去，没有点水涝，它水涝，水漫起来。3年之前就开始规划，通知，这学什么有什么东西，有些东西啊，这该处理的处理。
都有什么东西要处理？
你很简单嘛，像如果是街上的还好说啊，这只是家具。如果是像那种农村的，是不是？他搞的有什么就是比如说屋里有那种什么老年人的寿木啊，然后那些东西，要该要接到山势更高的地方，要变卖。有些东西不好携带的，便找着趁早在上面变钱，是不是？变钱了，带着现金走多好啊！我们那个多少人迁移到这个地方来啊？老县城的那个时候大概有3万多人吧。现在我们这整个县城也才只有7、8万人。
是以前有种地的人多一点，现在
那肯定的，我们以前
现在怎么办？现在都不能种地了。
没有地了，地早就没有了，打工呗，厂矿企业打工，或者自谋职业搞个体呗。然后那个泄洪的时候不让钓，平时都让钓。
什么时候泄洪？
泄洪这个节不泄了，要那个下暴雨之后它会泄洪。能钓到能卖的那个职业钓鱼的，我们都是业余的。
哦，钓不到大鱼。
钓不到。我上次我一个亲戚钓了一个18斤重，那不会也是钓了这么多年都活，钓了一次。我们10个人，还有1个鱼头我们还没吃完，光吃那个鱼头，煮那个鱼头活，把鱼头能吃。
So as we can see, many of those who formerly lived in now flooded villages work aboard cruise ships that serve a popular route along the Three Gorges from Chongqing to Yichang. With increasingly disposable income, many of China's formerly rural population are now able to travel domestically, of which many flock to travel along the historically famous landscapes, such as along the Three Gorges. And as this happens, many of those displaced shift their dependency on the river from that of manual labor to the service industry. As we took this image with the drone, we were heavily scolded by the ship crew to bring it down immediately, as that was completely not allowed. Those on these cruises do not come just for the natural beauty, but also to see the Three Gorges Dam for themselves, which we understood as a sort of national pride in such infrastructural projects. And this shift in labor to deal with the mass tourism of the rising middle class is seen in many places we visited on our trip, such as the Hukou Falls shown here. And also the arid tourism of Ningxia province, previously underpopulated and rural. Those who have previously dependent on the precious fertile soil from the river now work at the desert theme parks that are quickly gaining popularity. On the other hand, however, the trend of increased infrastructure projects and mass tourism can overwhelm certain sites, such as the Three Gorges waterfall shown here, being completely covered with garbage. In a very different climate, at 3,000 meters above sea level, we visited the picturesque rice terraces in Yunnan province, of which we were particularly eager to wake up early in the morning around 5 a.m. to take beautiful pictures, but as you can see, this is what greeted us in actuality. The lifestyle have felt extremely rural, but we were surprised to learn that many who had ventured out to larger cities, such as Kunming, had chosen to return due to poor working conditions in the city.
你以前在这里面住吗？
我没在这个我住的远，我在那帮杨庄村。
那你到这儿是帮着弄砖头还是？
我们在这边干活上班。
干活哦。
啊。
就这几天了。
这几天？
你再过几天来，可能就拍不下来了，就没有了。
什么时候开始的？
哎呀，开始几个月了，你看前面一大片都拆掉了。
哦，然后这拆掉之后干嘛呢？
盖高楼呗，盖更高的吧。
哦，你以前在这儿住吗？
没有。
打工啊？
打工的。
哦。老家是哪儿的？
老家北方的。
北方啊。
凉山的。
We also spent time trying to understand the shift in placemaking and urban development in contemporary China. The main development mode is that of the megaplot, where state-owned urban land is sold to developers, allowing for the city to develop with the state providing broadly spaced infrastructure between these large plots of land. And this reflects a shift from imperial Chinese urban planning, which emphasized a particular relationship with nature and a richness through the deep structure of walls and courtyards at multiple scales. Today's approach breaks from the traditional one of real estate speculation. So we faked to be buyers to buy a flat for my mom and viewed one of these large development show flats secretly.
这个就是今年年底竣工，然后6月份交房，然后那边也有一个那个学位房，
卖的比较好的都卖的差不多。
那边都差不多了，现在只有1-2套6800左右的均价。
知道的吗？现在这个特价7000多一点就可以买到了。
7000多一点。
哦，对，因为这瀑布公园的水还没开放嘛，可能还有10多天就开放了，这里风景特别好的。因为在这边嘛，可以把那10楼以上可以把整个公园都看完的。而且我们有验办法，就是装修好了，精装修的。你可以了解一下，反正现在很走嘛，一起去。
一栋楼的话，它是3梯6户的，一户人家的话就四个左右，就算4个，它有6户，6×4=24。还是人住1-2千，2000多个。
这里去可以去看一眼。
其实很多人考虑的都是风景这方面，还有这个学位这方面。它主要是从幼儿园一直到高中，而且是公立公办的，到云师大学位的。
因为我们的那个老总是那个政府里面的嘛，所以云师大的学位才可以起位在这盘里面。那是卡通的。
如果说你不在家的话，就是你的朋友来找你的话，就是你只用在手机上下一个 APP， 你就可以通过 APP 把房间打开，然后让他进去等你了。先看一下这个124的，这里的话，那里就是客厅，这里就是厨房、厨厅、餐厅。这里的话是一个主卧，而且的话，你看这里它都是可以，这个是可以拉伸的。而且的话，它这个墙都是可以打的。如果说你觉得这个大，可以打了，然后把它自己重新搞一下，给它把它缩小一点。这边有一个这个可以，这边是个洗澡室，然后它这里都是通着风的。
As you can see, he was very desperate to sell us the flat and kept on calling weeks and weeks after we were gone. So on a surface level of closeness with nature is understood by the developers, but the typical model of dense tower blocks being constructed allow maximum profit with the presence of water as an afterthought of the remaining space to represent good fortune for both residents and the sale properties. To understand the human perspective of such megaplots, we interviewed people in and around these developments.
对，瀑布公园的游客啦，还有里边的住户啦这些。
这已经有住户了吗？
这背后这个小区啊，有些住户
已经开始有了。
已经还差不多了，住户差不多。
什么时候开始
？6月25号开始搬进来的，逐渐搬进来。
6月25还在开始。
差不多1个月左右，1个月都不到。
你们来多长时间了？
我也才开启1个月不到点。刚来不到。
这样啊。瀑布是我听说今年初开始的是吧？
对。瀑布也才弄好不久，这个地方你看都还在开发的。
那你们准备在这儿待多长时间啊？
我们刚开启，我们要一直会这样开的嘛，除非这个被拆，不然的话我们就会这样开，一直开的。
这现在是算是
临时的，这个是临时铺面嘛。我们是过来租这个临时铺面做的。
租1个月贵吗？
好贵的，
是吧？
跟市中心铺子差不多。
如果水不开的话，它瀑布不流；水开的话，这个牛栏江水它一打开以后，瀑布流起来，还可以从瀑布下面还有一条走廊可以穿。最主要它的水可能还没开启，再过一段时间它水开启还是挺不错。特别过年的时候它一定会开水。
它一般不开吗？
平时最近没有刚刚建设嘛，后来就没开了。
最近怎么？
最近都没开水。
为什么不开呢？
因为水是要切的嘛，从江里面。开水它要电要切嘛。平时没什么游客的时候它不开，过段时间它可能就会开。然后逢年过节假期就会开起水。11月份它里边还有很多樱花，樱花开瀑布泛起来，那就漂亮多了。
以前都没有，以前是。
这上面这里有个村，有个村子。
以前没有一个村子。
有2个村子，这附近有2个村子，但是人不多。就是后来现在开发的嘛，你看这些都还在开发当中，学校也在建设当中，菜市场等等超市都在建设当中，基本没什么人。现在我们就是从农村的人出来城市的越来越多，出来就很少回家了。现在山上很多的山村里边是很多的家庭都荒了，房子荒了，塌了，山地也荒了，人慢慢的搬到城市里边了。
On another large-scale infrastructural project we examined was the South North Water Transfer Project, spanning across the country to bring clean drinking water from the south to the drought-ridden north. First imagined by Mao in the 50s, today, water from the Danjiangkou Reservoir travels over 1,600 kilometers to ease the drought crisis in Beijing in the world's longest aqueduct. And trying to arrange a visit to its termination point in Beijing was particularly difficult, where we had to coordinate with government officials and gather correct documents, which kind of eventually led us to nowhere. We found it was particularly difficult because Lorenzo was white. We did, however, manage to get into the construction site of the surrounding areas. Again, actually with the help this time, being Lorenzo as he is, and interviewed some locals.
昨天天梦那么大，大雨有他妈好几十条都，
是吧？
都脑子都出来了，缺氧。这水质不错，这里头有虾。
哦，
水质不错。
这样啊。您钓鱼多长时间了？
我这么多年了，好多年了。
好多年了，一直在这儿钓吗？还是？
不在这儿钓，在别处，在西直门那边。
怎么找到这个地方开始在这儿钓？
我搬这边住来了。我原来住西直门。西直门那住20年，那守着河，我肯定钓鱼。
肯定的。
哎，
那必须的。
在家里钓鱼，我从来没买过鱼。要说吃河鱼，我这冰柜都是钓满了。
是吗？这边现在在修地铁，我听说。
这不是观光地铁。
观光地铁。是观光颐和园还是？
颐和园。往那么是郊野公园，郊野公园下一站就吴安公墓，吴安公墓下一站就是植物园，植物园再下一站就香寨。
然后这南水北调呢，也可以参观吗？
南水北调好像不让你看，
不让看。那在这就是
南水北调绝对不让你看。
啊？为什么？
南水北调那家伙起码保证安全，你要投毒怎么办啊？
So about 345,000 villagers have been displaced by the project to date, where many were moved to the Heban new migrant village by a dusty highway in rural Pingdingshan in the neighboring Henan province. And at the source of the reservoir, we met a family that used to live in the village, which was relocated to make way for the construction. And this satellite image shows the original existing reservoir where the village used to be in 1984. And in 2017, this shows the shift of the landscape and the raised water levels. The relocated family comes back to the area, as is still their source of income, where we shared a fried fish breakfast over the conversation.
你看俺们这有个小街道，有些这原有个小江上个能请那个人木搬走嘛，都在俺们这里，都在居住这里这个以前个老坝。 都在这里赶集，
你们这是个集市，
小集镇哈。
然后他们都过来赶集，你们
搬走了，
挣点钱。
这人一搬走没人了，都挣不到钱。
This aqueduct, though only recently completed, has a much longer history. It extends and reuses the existing Grand Canal, and the first segment of which was constructed in roughly 500 BC, allowing China to grow and trade domestically. The South-North Water Transfer Project, therefore, can be viewed as a further development on China's historical infrastructural network. And ending this chapter on ways of living, we'd like to provide a little anecdote that we enjoy, where despite the severe flooding that shut down Wuhan shown earlier, the resilience of the citizens to assist in the anti-flooding efforts and their ability to enjoy something as simple as fishing as a result of the floods is very commendable. And for us, this shows the constantly shifting relationship between the river and those who depend on it.
It's quite slow. So a lot of information to cover, quite a few different strands of interest spreading out in different directions. But I think we just have a couple of notes to close on. For one, it was definitely a trip of discovery and I think even more information and even more documentation that we could have anticipated, even with such a designed itinerary. But what was super interesting was to step into this context with the intention of testing our experiences here and using certain forms of inquiry that we've learned to frame these conditions in ways that can inform another level, another visitation that we're interested in with even more architectural investigation. And the second, quite simply, that it's been very encouraging to know that as we're sort of figuring out what's next with this project, that we can still think of the AA as a place to come back to test these ideas in front of an audience. So I think we'll call it here if there's any questions. Obviously, don't be shy, otherwise we can also take it upstairs. But in the meantime, we did have a bit of fun in the process.